Alrighty, so we are live again. So
Sinking chair.
already playing musical chairs. We haven't even started
I
yet.
want to sing one that doesn't
Oh,
try to make me feel small.
so last time when we talked about index and range, I was under the impression that we could wrap this up in under an hour. We took the whole hour and we did not review a single API, I think. So this time we want to really focus on the API shape. And maybe also take some notes on things that we think are missing, so we can add this to the to-do list. So to just have some people up, they were not here last time. So when we reviewed this, Krista brought up one question, which was, do we need the types at all? And we talked a little bit about that. In the notes for the API review, I've tried to capture his general proposal, which was, imagine a low-level type like span, where you really don't want to have the overhead that range and index impose on you, meaning the whole, duplicate bounce checking in particular that he's concerned about that the JIT cannot get rid of. So the idea would be that if you care about performance for span and other things, then you would always have the in-based overloads anyway that you can call. And then he said, that's unfortunate because it means you cannot use the language syntax at all, just for doing simple stuff. So he was proposing, imagine some sort of attribute on the method or the parameter where you can say, well, you can, at the call side, kind of do the ... syntax, and the compiler will basically split them into two arguments, right? And then afterwards, and I said, well, the problem with that would be that it doesn't compose well with, because it's not an expression, you basically have special syntax on the call side. Ben basically proposed that, well, if the compiler would just code split the call side, meaning the values of type range or index, no matter where it came from, the compiler just unpacks them at the call side, then the very special case where it's literally between the parentheses, you can just optimize that unpacking away. You just don't have to type at all. But everything would compose fine. If you take the expression, you assign it to a local, that would work. Use the head operator, it would work. However, of course, when you use head operators and other things, well, you're now starting to incur some more of the overhead that you try to get rid of with the API, but at least your developer experience doesn't completely deteriorate just because you used one more feature, right? But I think what we landed last time was that this is kind of orthogonal to the types at all, because I think there's a language aspect to that, which has to do with composability and other things where types are useful. And then the other question is, okay, how can we get this to a better place for some performance-oriented APIs? And I think given this proposal, I feel like we can have a very smooth transition there if we feel like we need to do that. And for now, having the overload seem fine. The only thing is when we add these parameters or these special attributes, we probably want a rule where we say if you have them, we prefer them over the range-based or index-based methods, because otherwise, if we ship span today that takes range or index and later on we do the other thing, then, well, we're screwed. We're still calling the other ones and you don't get the performance benefit. But I think that's more like a design on how the feature would work at that point. So I would table this for now. I would say let's not talk about this today at all, because otherwise, first of all, Christopher isn't even here. And secondly, I feel like that's something we can split off and we can just review index and range in isolation. All right, so then index.
Yes, although we wouldn't be able to ever do that.
Sorry, we would not be able to do this ever?
Yeah.
Why?
Break and change.
In what sense?
Like the same syntax can't call a different method ever. If it currently compiles and binds to a specific method, we can never change that.
Well, what about when you introduce new overloads of a method?
It always binds to
The API, if the API introduces a new method and we prefer that, then it's no longer a language breaking change. It's a library breaking change to have a different method called that the span API would choose to take.
Do we change overload resolution to prefer a different method? Don't we usually consider that a very big break?
Well, I think the idea here would be that
if we already exposed both a span overload that took start end and a one that took range, and C# ships the feature it calls range, and then later you add the new syntax that would make it prefer to call the more performant start end, that would be breaking.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, I think the idea would be that if you ship two, okay, let's say for a second we ship both methods, right? Slice method that takes int in and a slice method that takes range, right? I think we wouldn't introduce new language in that. We would just say we provide the developer an attribute that they can apply to the methods which if they do that, the compiler would now prefer the other overload. But the library author has to do something to their code. It's not that you just take the existing code with the same target framework, recompiling it and get different bind rules.
I get that, but there's still the situation where you target that new API using an older version of C# that didn't know to prefer the new overload.
Right.
And
so
now it's a breaking change to upgrade to C#.
So I agree with that. All I'm saying is that
Interesting.
the author of the library basically has to say these have to have the same semantics. It's just faster.
I think it's going to be problematic.
I think that's why I would say
yeah.
it seems like something that
We'll have to.
I could imagine us doing, but let's. I mean, so basically what you're pointing out, we should review this before we ship 3.0, right? So that we make sure that if there is a breaking change, we can at least decide not to ship certain methods now, so that we can call ourselves later, right? But that's
Yes,
again,
I would
kind of
say
what
that. Yeah, you shouldn't add the method. If you're worried about the performance, you shouldn't add the method because there's a very good chance that we cannot change this in the future for backwards compatibility concerns.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's all kinds of problems with that particular solution. Also, you have an int, method that's different from the usual framework pattern of having offset, length.
Yes.
And how does that clash with, it's just.
That's why I said, I think this whole proposal warrants a very different discussion.
Yeah.
And we can choose to have it.
We'll have to trust our future
when.
selves to find a way to solve the problem if it turns out to be a problem at that time. I think. Yeah.
So one thing that we talked about briefly in LDN today was, as you can see, all of the well-known members are annotated, but at least for range, some of those aren't strictly necessary. The compiler doesn't need all or from start or to end. It really just needs create, and it can create or something substantially similar, and it can cons up the appropriate indices for each side. So we can remove the well-knownness of those.
Right.
Why is all a method rather than a property or a static read-only field? Because isn't all just basically index start, index last?
Do you have zero at zero?
Yeah, basically.
I do not recall.
Because it would seem like it'd be more efficient for the JIT to optimize, etc. You could use it with in parameters, etc.
My guess is it's for consistency with the other three the other three factories, but it's a weird kind of factory because you could return the same actual. Well, you're returning the same actual value every time.
I mean, it's logically a const, right?
Yeah.
Logically.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it might be an artifact of the way they were originally done. I think originally it was a constructor, or it was some. I think we also at some point had passed in arguments in all cases, and I think that at this point it should probably be similar to empty, right? It's just a static field.
Yeah.
Yep, and so that's something that I can remove from the compiler. One of the kind of compiler to-dos that I'm adding is remove the dependency on these well-known numbers.
How is all a well-known number? Do you support ... without any integers on either side?
Yeah. Yeah, and if you want a consistency between the two types in terms of how they're created, create might as well be a constructor, I think.
Okay.
It's a little odd that one is created with a constructor and the other with a factory.
Well, and create presumably needs to call an internal constructor anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it could call the default constructor and assign the values in itself, but
It's a read-only struct, so you'd have to do 2 with calls then and all kinds of other craziness.
it's a read-only structure, right?
Yeah, so it would probably need to be a constructor.
Yep, and that's fine. So we can just make it a constructor, which is fine from the compiler perspective. We'll just change the signature that we're looking for.
So I had a question on that. You dropped out for a second, or my connection, or so I may have missed it. But one of the right now there'd be no difference. Like right now, the implementation of range.all does new range, new index, new index. But in theory, it could just be stored in a static read-only field, and we would avoid all of the argument checking and whatnot every time all is called. With the constructor or with the create method, if the compiler is just generating the equivalent of range.create, new index, in theory, it'd be more expensive unless the JIT is really good at making them match.
That is true.
Yep.
Well, we could always change all to call an internal private constructor, so I don't think that would affect the public
sorry,
API.
I don't mean, I'm not worried about all. It was if the compiler consolidates all of its access to the single constructor or the single create method, there's not much we can do about that other than have the JIT be really, really good at seeing, inlining everything, eliminating branches, all that kind of stuff.
So we did actually run into something similar with the span APIs, and we filed a few bugs where the compiler was implicitly creating span instances on your behalf, passing in literals for the constructor arguments, and the JIT team was pretty good about knocking all of those out so that the JIT could elide all of the bounce checking. I would be surprised if we didn't do the same work here.
All right, we should probably just, I like simplifying, what the compiler depends on. We should probably just vet with Andy or someone that it can be done the way we expect.
Yeah, I mean, there's a similar thing for from start and to end. They technically don't need to do the argument checking for the end that they're just going to have a 0 or...
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, right, so I kind of anticipated the JIT would see through a constructor because it really should, but
we shouldn't contort the API or the compiler to work around the JIT issue.
I was thinking, I don't see a way that this could be observable, except for the fact that the all method would have to exist. But there's nothing wrong with a well-known member not necessarily existing. So we can optimistically do it, right? In the same way that we did this for array.empty and params, that we emit a params that's not filled in with array.empty, but only if array.empty is present. We can ship v1 create with just with the constructor, with a range constructor, and then if the JIT can't do it, we can add a well-known member for all with whatever it ships as, and then the nice thing is that the CoreFX can kind of decide what they want that API to look like and finalize it, and then we can come in later and just kind of accept whatever is the standard.
And I hope Levi's right that everything will just sort out in the JIT, and then it helps all cases, not just all.
There's again a similar thing for index actually. Creating the 0 index and the from end, the last element index, or the beyond last element index. Those could be static properties as well if we were worried, but they probably, that's probably not worth it.
Hopefully it'll be essentially free and the equivalent of default index and default range to do the full span.
And I should be clear, I'm not speaking for the JIT team, right? I'm just giving context based on what they did for us in the past.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a quick question. Mm-hmm. If I understand the conversation here, we're talking about dropping the well-known aspect of it, but we're not talking about dropping those members, are we?
No.
All right, thank you.
And just so I understand, so from start is effectively a call to create start and then index.last?
Yeah.
And then to end is effectively create
0
index.first to end. Or whatever we decided that the property should be last time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And all will create both.
Right.
What is last hat 0 or hat 1?
Hat 0.
0.
Okay.
Wait, so...
Or sorry, last, that's correct. Last we thought was hat 1 because that's the last element.
Yes.
Right, so it wouldn't be hat...
It wouldn't be last, it would be hat 0.
Yeah.
It would be end.
Yeah.
So why does the compiler even need from end and value today? How do you use these two members on index?
we need to extract for arrays. We need to be able to emit an array indexer.
I see.
Where we actually tell what the from end and what the actual value are, so we can emit an indexer.
Right. Wait, that's interesting. If someone writes array sub, oh no, never mind. It won't matter.
If they array of hat 3, we take the index and then we emit basically a load element off of the index, but convert index to an int.
Right. Sorry, if someone writes hat 3 with an array, since the compiler is generating all the code, why do you use index at all?
Well, every type is going to have a term. Or sorry, other way around. Every term is going to have a type. And hat 3 is just term typed as index.
It might be that somebody stored it in a local and used that later, so.
Right. You should still be able to, should be able to index an array using an actual system.index type.
Sure, but I guess maybe this is, you would accept, if someone submitted a PR where if you actually typed array sub hat 1 to access the last element, you would be okay with a PR where the resulting IL didn't mention index at all, right?
I guess, sure. I don't know. It would be, we'd have to see a reason to do it. Given that we have to support, in the compiler, we generally don't try and shortcut the normal operation just for kind of convenience sake.
If the type index doesn't exist, such that, if the compiler doesn't see a type system.index, can I still use this syntax to?
No, you will get a compiler.
No, okay.
Hat means construct me an index.
Okay.
And if the index type doesn't exist, then you cannot use the syntax.
We did.
I was just wondering specifically. I totally understand not shortcutting for things where the operation is defined in the library, but for array where the operation is defined by the language, round tripping through index seems odd to me. But I understand.
It's just that it's easier since we have to have the code path for index anyway. It's easier to just go through the same code path and reduce the probability of bugs.
Right.
There's a lot of. I just found a bug actually because of this code spit I did, where I made a subtle change, and it turns out that that's observable through ref variables. So, right, that's the kind of thing where you really want to avoid that, because you might introduce a bug, and it better be worth it.
So the compiler basically won't be doing for X index hat 3. It won't do load len and then sub 3, and then just call into the accessor for arrays.
There's no accessor, it's via a load element.
Right. That's what I mean.
We'll do a new index and then index dot, and then the full index math in order to generate the offset.
Does that mean that system.array needs to add a new method?
No. In the same way that we do not call a method to do array indexing right now.
Or addition of 2 ints, right? There's an IL instruction for that, so they just emit the IL instruction.
Right, but the compiler has to have the knowledge of how to get the length out of array, whereas for every other type, the user has to do the conversion from a hat index into the appropriate literal index. Whereas array, that's not possible because array doesn't have.
Well, logically, the way to think about this, right? Logically, the compiler pretends that array has an index, so it takes an index and just emits the code that doesn't do that, right? So, but in a normal, in your own custom type, you would actually have an indexer that takes an index.
Yeah.
And then your implementation has to do the math, right? So the user never has to do the math.
Yeah. So your
it's only the receiver that has to do that.
Has to have an if from end, then length minus
that value. Yes. But the idea is that the receiver does it, right? So the person processing it in never has to do any math.
Does the compiler right now ever implicitly look up array.length as a value?
Yeah. we don't do array.length. There's a specific IL instruction for getting the length.
I mean, if you write do for each loop, right?
LD line, yeah.
So,
sorry, when would the compiler ever event that?
We generate
for each loop, right?
loop over arrays.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Turns it into a for loop
So then,
by getting the length out.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you have like some array, sorry, Stephen, I don't think you can see this.
Can't see.
We can type it up in Teams for.
Don't worry about it. I can guess.
Okay, so you write an array hat0 or hat3 or whatever, right? So fundamentally what this is going to do is it's going to go through two passes. It's going to go through our initial binding phase where we see, okay, you have an array, you're doing an array access, and you're passing indices as arguments, one of possibly many. So we're going to bind the array, we're going to bind the element access, and we're going to bind the index. We're just going to stick them in this bound array thing. And then when we come down, and we're going to visit, we have a rewriter pass to simplify in our lowering phase, and we're going to see this bound array access, and we're going to say, okay, is the indices sub 0 an index? And if so, generate a load element, create the bound nodes for load element access, but do all the index math in the process. So the suggestion of like hat3 and this statically turning into something different is essentially saying, in your lowering phase, instead of just taking the normal code path where you look for an index and then you turn it into a series of operations on that index, statically realize that the thing that you have in hand is a constant value that was written literally. Pull it apart into its constituent values, and then emit specialized code for that constant. So this isn't like a new way of doing things. It's just like additional code. It's a specialized code path. And so the answer for any specialized code path in the compiler is it worth it? Because this generalized code path works for everything. So the only question will be, is it worth it? And that's a question that we can ask and then answer based on data.
We do it for another language feature, which is tuples, where if they occur literally in the source code as tuple on either side, either as tuple construction expressions or tuple deconstruction, we will try to avoid actually loading the corresponding underlying types. We'll not try super hard, but we will try. There are well-defined cases where we do, so that if you never carry the tuple itself around, never reify a tuple value, we will not require it. That had to do with timing issues around who could get at the tuple types when the language feature came out. I don't think we want to do something similar here for the
it can be dealt with later. My question was purely because I was thinking about common access patterns today, and array sub array.length -1 is a pretty common thing that you see done to access the last element or something. And so if people are going to start writing array sub hat1 instead of array sub array.length -1, it occurred to me.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying we won't do it. I'm just saying that we should consider it as with the full knowledge of what it entails and the trade-offs. Like, for example, what if it's hat -1?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, with throw, we want the compiler to generate a throw. That seems really bonkers. We should probably write a compile time error for that, but oh wait, we can't provide compile time errors in lowering. That needs to be in binding, so we need to hoist this code up to, there's complexity.
Yep.
I mean, the question there is I think it would be nice, but I don't think that it's required to fail for this compile time. It's not like anything bad happens. It's just that you have nonsensical code, and we cannot detect all usages of nonsensical code anyway. Right? It's the best effort, I think, in general. So I think to me the question was more like, do we believe that having any implicit conversion from int to index is good or bad because of the negativity issue, right? No matter who is doing it, the compiler or the framework, right? And I think we convinced ourselves that the usual guideline of not having implicit conversions that can fail doesn't really apply here, because the code that will blow up that you see in the debugger is basically the line where you made the mistake, right? Because regardless of what you do, the receiver usually, when you do it inline with an expression where you index into an array or you call substring, that method would throw the index out of range exception, right? Now we just do it at the time we do the conversion, which is usually the same thing, but it might be earlier if you captured it as a local variable. But I think that's still very close to where you made the mistake, and so that's, I think, actually pretty helpful.
It's sort of the it's the price we pay for not having 2 extra bits in the struct, right? We could have index completely collect any integer and have a bit next to it that is from end or from beginning, and we have 2 of those adding up to 2 indexes and like 2 integers and 2 bits in the range, and then we wouldn't need to check yet. We could delay it until. But now we have 2 extra bits that make the type layout insane in memory and all that kind of stuff. It's essentially we're just throwing a little earlier on negative and saving those 2 crucial bits.
Yes.
It's a performance thing, really, but.
Yeah. Well, speaking of performance as well, is there any concern that for the common case of using a hat, people are going to have to check if it's from end, which will be a bit mask access, then they're going to get value, which will be another bit mask, and then they're going to ultimately subtract the value when in the, it could have been as simple as if value is less than 0, then add it to length instead of just taking value as is when computing the index. Seems like there's a lot of operations there.
There's a lot.
That could.
Those are the kinds of things that I was talking about with regards to the JIT and whether it could eliminate stuff or not.
But I mean, like the less than 0 comparison is effectively the thing that the from end index can do, right? So when you inline everything at JIT time, it would be probably close to what you would have written manually at that point.
Well, other than value has to do it can't just mask out the upper bit, and
it does it too. If it does it once complement.
Yeah, it will have to do one's complement to mask out the bit, and then the user will ultimately end up subtracting that from length, when in actuality they could have just taken the original value and added it to length, since it was already negative internally.
That's a one-off issue.
Well, it seems like a fairly frequent...
It's because it's one's complement and not two's complement.
Right.
You need to add it and then either subtract or add 1 to the result.
Yeah, you'd end up smearing the high bit over the value.
Right.
So it wouldn't be fewer operations, I think.
Yeah. What we would have to do is we would have to add the indexer that takes index to our types in the framework and see what the best internal representation is that allows the JIT to make the best optimizations.
One thing we had in an earlier version of the type, if I recall correctly, when we tinkered with it on the compiler team, was a static helper method, or maybe it was even an instance helper method, to apply it to a given when you have a collection of a given length, you could pass in a length that's a parameter, and you can get an int out, which is sort of the computed index from beginning based on a given length. So we could offer the helper method of computing it for you. You don't have to write the logic in your own implementation.
Yes, it was like get offset or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can.
It's a static helper that you call get offset on index, I think, and you like passed in the index and the offset.
Right. Then you don't have to write the logic. We give you a helper method that does the logic, and all you have to supply is what's the length that you want to compute relative to, and And if from end is false, we just ignore it, and if it's true,
It should be
we...
listed in the issue, I think.
We talked about doing that yesterday, didn't we?
Is it there?
So which
Can
one?
you scroll down a little bit?
Yeah,
I think it's actually on the
This
screen.
is relative to
Oh, okay.
links and
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's
No, okay.
get length and close, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
that's something I
perfect,
want to talk
perfect.
about, yeah.
That's, yeah. And that should just return an int, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the thing we should talk about. Maybe we should talk about this now. But I mean, my other question before we go to range is that
Well, get length was for range, but there's a second offset index helper that could exist.
Yeah, it's one for index,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
that you need as well.
so what would it be on index? Basically
Get offset or something,
Yeah,
which computes you the absolute position relative to
I
a
see
given
what you're
length.
saying. Yes, that's fair. So assuming we had that, would the compiler call that? Probably not, right? You would still do the manual
No, we
composition.
call it.
as
I-
opposed to doing the from end question mark.
Yeah,
Or we call it from the array logic, is what you're saying?
yeah, why
Yeah,
not?
yeah.
It seems fine. Like we'd rather do a method call.
Right.
Right.
But implementers of their own data types would call it as well. And,
Yeah.
Right.
and nobody, it's like having hash code helpers. You don't want to
Yeah.
implement those
This,
yourself.
this is just a case where the compiler is helpfully implementing the indexer for us
Yeah.
because the indexer doesn't actually exist
Right.
for array. Actually, I was playing around with some C# code. Arrays right now also, at least the C# compiler, allows you to use a long as an indexer into an array, not just an int. Would we need to account for that here as well? Like a conversion from long to index?
Wasn't here for the original discussion on this.
I don't know what the scenarios are for using long as an index on.
Well, you can use them with native code, but at least as far as the runtime is concerned, you can't create an array over int.max value length right now.
Correct. It would only be for indexing, not
Yeah.
for constructing.
Remember in the beginning when Christoph also attended some of the C# design meetings and you were there too, we did discuss having an index and a long index,
Right.
having a second type, and we just realized the scenarios for that were probably zero. So rather than trying to have completeness on that, we would just wait and see if anybody came and said, we depend crucially on this. So we were kind of aware of it, but just
Yeah, yeah.
decided
And
it
again,
wasn't-
I'm not advocating making overlong arrays. It's just one of the things that came up in yesterday's design meeting was that I had an API that took an int or a long or something as a parameter, and I was plumbing it through to a collection that took an index as a parameter.
Yeah.
What kinds of casts do I need to perform explicitly versus what should I depend on implicitly?
Yeah.
And I know that we said we want an implicit conversion from int to index just to make the code look nicer. Do we need the same for long just because C# currently allows it? I don't know if there are good scenarios for it.
And or native int.
Or native int, yeah. Well, we don't have native int yet.
Well,
So
But we would eventually.
from long to index,
So it would just be another implicit operator
but from long to index.
from long to index.
it's
How-
just
how
one
is
that
it-
would fail on a larger percentage of its,
Yeah.
its values.
Just like how int value, just like how that implicit operator will fail if int is negative.
But I think that's a different class. But I think, I don't know, developers are kind of used to the fact that in practice only means half of the values because almost nothing takes negative values. But I don't know, from long to int seems fairly wrong.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, because now, like, well, you cap out it like int.max value plus 1, right?
The
It seems-
scenarios where I've seen it happen, and again, I don't know if these are good scenarios, is I'm kind of what Tanner said, I'm interoperating with native code, I have 2 pointers, I subtract them, the
Right.
result of subtracting 2 pointers across all .NET platforms is a long,
Right.
even if I'm in a 32-bit process, and now I use that as an index into something else.
Yeah.
Even though I know for a fact it would have fit into an int, it's just it happens to be typed as long.
But I mean, like, if you write pointer code, then I think in practice you probably want to have an assert at that point anyway, and say like, you know, I better be within that
Yeah,
idea
I'd
explicit
like
class.
to see an explicit conversion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that feels like it's probably better.
Because
Yeah.
if you're wrong,
You're
Then-
really wrong.
No,
then
here's
it's
the thing.
clear where you're wrong.
No, but
Yeah.
here's the thing, an explicit conversion will truncate, whereas an implicit conversion will throw index out of range exception.
Well, if you do check.
What? Yeah, I was gonna say in a
What-
checked
This
context.
does checked.
No, I'm saying like you would have to surround the cast in a check in order to get that behavior.
And as we discussed yesterday, only Jeremy and I are the only two people in the world who do
True. I don't know. Like I feel like if you do pointer arithmetic, like I think you're past the point where I would say convenience is your biggest worry. I think your biggest worry is hopefully that you don't pointer into uninitialized memory.
No. And this was just an example of where you might get along from.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the scenario where it came up before was ASP.NET in the context of pipelines where they basically use buffers that are concatenated. So like every index they have must be long because they don't know how long the request goes. Okay. But at any given point in time, they don't exceed the window size of index value, but everything takes a long.
I should also note that array access currently supports an index. Pointer access does not.
Supports long, you mean?
No, like the entire index.
Yeah.
Like pointer access, there's no.
Because there's no length. Like, what would a have index even mean?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, in this scenario where you're manipulating pointer lengths, but you don't have a pointer, that one's a little shaky. That, like, I feel like most people who are manipulating pointer lengths also probably have a pointer.
What about fixed size buffers where technically it's a pointer because the language hasn't updated it to use span yet, hopefully soon, but you know the length deterministically?
Well, hopefully you always know the length of your pointers.
No.
But for fixed size buffers, can you use index?
No.
Okay.
They're pointers for the C# purposes. Also, C# does not technically.
If at a point where there's spans, there's spans.
Yeah.
And then we can. So.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah. All right.
So how do we feel about general any operators on index? Like for example, plus plus minus minus. Was the other one we discussed?
We discussed
comparison at least would be nice, right? Equals, not equals would be. I think
would they
useful.
be always checked?
I just don't think it's possible. Like, how do you compare 0 and #0?
Right.
Yeah, comparison's a bit strange unless you know.
Equals and not equals you can do, right?
Oh yeah, well it is already
equals, sure.
Yeah, no, there's no double. I guess the constructor is implicit anyway, but like, yeah, that's fair.
So plus plus would add 1 if it's from the beginning and subtract 1 if it's from end?
It always goes to the right.
Yeah.
Tarek just brought this up. Like I said, like to me, it's not very unconfusing. It always goes up, but since you just said the opposite, I think Tarek has a point. It's like
it always advances.
It's confusing.
That's
the direction you are going.
It always advances. Plus plus always advances.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Minus always
I can see that making sense.
It advances. It advances. Like
I mean, if I give you from the end 100 from the end, what this means plus plus.
To advance is to move rightward. So in your case, toward the end.
Which means subtract 2 from the 100 that you had from end.
Yeah.
It's 98 from end.
Yeah.
Yes. That makes sense.
I don't think it makes full sense for me because, like, if I'm in some index, I know that this is index from the end, and I'm saying plus plus. I am expecting this moving towards the end of the buffer, not the other way around.
I think the expectation is when I have an index, if I have operators directly on the index, I shouldn't have to care whether it's an abstraction over whether it's from end or from beginning, and it should have an abstract meaning that makes sense for all indexes, right? And the only useful meaning for those would be that it takes you in one direction or the other direction.
This would be true if everybody understands this, but I don't think anybody consuming index will understand.
Well, the problem is, but if, let's say I give you a value and it's typed as index. I don't think it's helpful if I do +1 on that one, it might go left or right depending on how it was initialized. Because like to me, the way index works is head or non-head is just the way I give you the value. But it's still the same value. Like we're still talking about slot number 455 in the array, whether I gave it to you relative from end or whether I gave it to you absolute from start, right? It doesn't matter to you, right? So if I now say +1, whatever this thing points to,
I fully understand your point. I mean, I'm not
+1.
objecting this, but I don't think everybody will understand this. This is my
that's
point.
That's the possibility.
I wonder what the utility though is of having.
So the utility
like
for that is like, so the reason why I think operators might be useful is that if you don't have them, like very common operations you do with indices basically stop working, right? Because as soon as you have, let's say you do head 5, and now you want to say minus 10 or something on it, you can no longer do that. Now you have to because there's no arithmetic defined on those guys.
Yeah, then you have to yourself implement the logic of if from end, then value minus minus, otherwise value plus plus for plus plus.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And we think it is common to do? Because I was thinking about, okay, I'm writing my own for loop, but if I'm writing the for loop, if I'm writing a loop, I need to have an end condition of some sort.
Right.
Which means I have a concrete collection that I'm foring over, and that one has a length. And I'm probably better off converting it to an int and taking that up to the length.
I guess that's fair, but the thing is, the way I see it is when you do parsing code, right, very often you say, first name, comma, last name, right? And so you say, well, the first name ends there, but then I now have a comma, and how do I want to do plus equals 2 on that one? How do I do that, right? And now it's I have to write the business.
I would almost think that most of the logic most people will already be exposing overloads that take int. And so they'll add the index overloads for convenience, and those methods will purely call into the int overload by realizing the index to concrete values.
So the receiver does that. I'm talking about the person that uses string, right? That is called substring that takes index, right? Or substring that takes range. They want to do their computation on how to express the first name, how to express the last name, how to express the comma, right? And at some point in there, you do arithmetic where you say, last name starts two things after the first name ended, right?
It seems reasonable, especially for range, to be able to say, I want to move the start position in the range a little bit forward or a little bit back.
Right.
And for that to work, you have to have arithmetic on index, because otherwise, because it's based on index, so it has to be able to move forward or back.
It's basically the concept of instead of start end, you have start length, right? You want to start here and you want to move this many digits from the current position, whatever it is.
Well, end versus length is just how you want to express the arithmetic, but at the end of the day, you still want to say -2, right? Some value, right?
That's what I'm saying. Is you're saying that you have the case where you have the starting position and you want to advance 2 characters,
right?
And you don't want to yourself have to realize the index because you might not have all the info to do so.
Right.
But then there's the second point, which is the plus operator would have to throw.
In what circumstance?
In the sense that you're going past the end or before the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, but index wouldn't know that, right? Index
sure it would.
How would index know?
would only be able to detect
if you do hat 0 plus 1, what should it say?
Oh, so, okay.
I should assume it should throw.
Okay, so that's the same situation with 0 minus 1. Right?
Exactly.
So at the cases where you can validate, you should throw, yes. That's probably true.
And then you also have the case of, unless the compiler has special knowledge, then for literal values, you will never get the error codes for when you use that arithmetic.
Sure.
Which is
but this is like a carry through of all of these operators throw.
Yeah, I think for math, though, that's kind of unfortunate because you really want to do the operation and then check where you landed, right? You don't want to do it before you do the operation. That's very counterintuitive.
Yeah, and
I think for casting, it's kind of different because you may not cast, or you just call the method and then the cast happens as part of the method invocation. So that's not the point where you expect anything to happen. But with arithmetic, it seems odd that plus would throw.
And there's probably cases where the user statically knows that what they're doing is safe, and we have to do checked internally, and they want to align those check contexts.
By the way, I think maybe that statement is true for where we've ended up, but I think that from a design perspective, that is absolutely not true. That I would expect fixed length integers when you overflow or underflow to throw by default. And that in fact, my preference, if we were redesigning everything from scratch, would be that every single one of our arithmetic operators throws on out-of-bounds values.
So I would agree with that statement, but I think the problem with ins is that if you think of index as a more convenient way of an int32, right? Then you wouldn't expect us to throw on negative values. You wouldn't expect us to throw on, your value is 25 because the collection is 25, and then you add 1 and now you're out of bounds, right? You would generally expect to do the arithmetic, you get a value, then you compare that value to whatever bounds you have, rather than the opposite, right? But the problem is, in our sense, we cannot represent certain values. We can represent negative values, and we cannot represent, past the end, right? So the only option we have is throw. So in that sense, index is not like into
Well, we could add try methods. I just don't think it's worth it. I prefer throwing.
No, I mean at that point, like when you have a try method, you have effectively defeated the point of having operators, right? Because now that really gets ugly to say +1. Try add 1, try remove 1. Like
I was saying you could have it in addition, right? You could have the operator, and then you could have a try method.
Like try add.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that code might be.
I think the operators are for situations where you know that there is that much left maneuvering space left in the collection. Like you know that it's first name, comma, last name.
Right. Yeah.
It's not for so much for looping situations where you're already doing a bounds check.
Yeah, I should say this is the throwing every single instance where you go out of bounds. This is a logic error.
Yeah.
This is a bug in your program. There's no situation in which this is just something that's not represented.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. All I'm saying is that like I think for the conversion, I convinced myself that for the most part, the difference between you're using the value versus you're constructing the value is within the same vicinity. Versus I think with arithmetic, it's not kind of like that. Because the way you write normal code is you do your arithmetic, you get values out. They may be invalid, but then you do your checks, right? And then you call the methods, right? So you would generally, intermingling them as part of the arithmetic operation, I think will be surprising to people.
So I had written on the board, since we were talking about the example of splitting last name, comma, first name. So right now, if you call index, string.index out, searching for a comma, you're going to get back an int32 as a return value. Do we see any APIs that might return index as a return value as opposed to simply int offsets? Like, do we only see index as something that's going to be passed into APIs rather than returned from them?
I actually kind of dislike returning an index because it's no longer specific to it doesn't provide as much information. Because it's divorced from the length of the collection, you've actually lost information.
So it's not telling you anything more than a regular int32 would, it's pure overhead.
Yeah.
That without additional value.
It's actually telling you less.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Because if I was going to argue that if we saw APIs that returned an index, at that point it definitely makes sense to add operators, because now you're going to have local variables of type index that you're going to need to advance on or reverse on. But if we don't anticipate people having locals of type index, the operators are a lot less useful.
Well,
you might
still say component expressions are still a thing, right?
You might still get them as a parameter.
Yeah. But if you get them as a parameter and we expect people to immediately call the get me the actual offset from the underlying collection, then you only have them for exchange purposes, and then everything falls down to int32. Which means they're not really sticking around as locals, right? You take them as parameters, and then they're off at that point.
Okay.
So we don't have to expose any more operator. Just for now, if we see if somebody needs it, we can just add it later. As we need so.
Yeah, we should definitely have equals because they are equal.
Right. I mean, like I think they already exist on struct by default, right? You don't have to write them. I think that was the conclusion that we had last time.
Yeah.
And apparently our implementation is not as efficient as I thought. I always thought that when you do equals on struct without defining them yourself, it's horrible performance, but apparently that's no longer the case.
Okay.
It's effectively a mem.com, which is, I guess, as fast as you can make it.
Sure.
The thing is that for so we said basically we don't want those guys. So then for the method that gives you the absolute offset, what would that look like? We would say get offset, we pass in length.
Yeah.
We happy with the names? Offset, length. I can't think of anything else.
Position is used for stream. Do we want to create an analogy
Get position
there?
instead.
Yeah. I mean, offset seems fine. I don't know. But if you want to give the sense that this is an absolute position in the
Yeah, the reason I like offset is
container.
kind of it implies it's relative to 0.
Well, it implies it's relative to something. In the same way that when you say offset in arrays, you don't always mean offset from 0.
I mean,
Like
for
array
this-
copying or something.
Yeah.
Like I can give you an offset and you can apply it to some like the start of the array, right? Or start of the span before we had spans.
I guess.
I guess the right word is index, but that's kind of taken.
Yeah, I was about to say, can I call it index?
Absolutely.
Index or get index? What are you guys smoking?
That's why it's an absolute index.
Right.
Yeah, offsets, I mean, it's fine. I don't think it'll be confusing. The dot comment clarifies, it's fine. I don't think
And then
it's a
we
problem.
pass in a thing called length, not count, not size. Length, I think, seems to be the right.
Or container names.
Yeah, I'm not sure what container would add because, I mean, again, like when you see length, I don't know what else it would be.
It might be a little. I mean, it's not self-explanatory here.
Right.
Right.
It's a. I mean,
But then that API is going to
Collection
be
length,
used by
actually.
people implementing things like collections, and I would imagine that that category developer is going to be going through some of our tutorial and sample code. So I would hope that that will teach them the right API pattern.
Well, the dot comment will make a lot of sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then the collection length, if we name it collection length, that's fine. If we name it length and it's explained in the dot comment, that's fine too.
Yeah.
I think it's all fine.
All right. So then I go with get offset for now. So I think then index is done, right? Any other comments on index?
Do we need any factory method?
So any factoring methods?
Yeah.
Which ones would you propose?
Like you know, you create from start 0 index from end. Yeah, we have from end and from start, but this is putting counters. But I'm just saying, like, if you want to create like 0 index, I don't see big value, but just using that one.
Yeah, I don't know about.
I mean, couldn't you just make front end optional at that point? And then you'd have a constructor that works, so if you just say 0, it would be start, and front end would be implicitly false. And if you wanted at 0, you would say 0 front end true.
This could be.
So you're saying you would have a single one that just takes it in, then you make it negative?
No, he would. I was saying you could just make from end optional.
Oh, I see.
in the constructor.
Yeah, in the constructor, and then you can just have a single constructor that works for the common case of I just want a index from the beginning,
Okay.
or having
For
a
those of us
secondary.
that are trying to do this all in the head, could somebody summarize before we finish index how the final shape looks like compared to what we're looking at from the preview 1 release?
I think at this point we're just adding stuff. All the stuff up there.
It
will
occurs to me
probably
that should be
stayed.
valid. On the walk
And
over
what
here,
did we add? Which things did we add? Just quickly review.
So
We
the one
just
thing that
started
we
talking
added
about
was
arithmetic.
index, get
Operators.
offset. Sorry, like actually, let me just project this. I guess it's easier. Let me just rephrase this. Right.
How do you propose to represent that?
I just, on the walk over here, when I was trying to find my dad joke, that's what I came up with.
So we already did that level.
You just completely.
You're halfway into the meeting, is that right?
Yeah. The range of time I'm in the meeting is half.
You didn't figure out the whole fact that we don't have an index.end representation that's independent of, or that's dependent upon container length. So a divide by 2 does not work.
I tried to make a syntactic joke and I succeeded.
Did anyone laugh right now?
I did. And that's all that matters.
All right, Kathleen.
Better if we could see both of them together.
Oh, sorry. You're asking very hard questions today.
I am demanding today.
You're very demanding today.
I am.
Yeah, so that seems. I don't think the from start from end are.
From end is a bit problematic in that there's already a public member called from end.
Right.
I guess that is not helping, is it? Yeah.
I like
Quite frankly,
kind of ideas about make from end as optional parameter for the constructor.
That's probably good enough. Yeah. Or maybe let me just do this. You can actually see it on the screen.
Although I will say that I was imagining it looking kind of pretty with the from start and from end in a language that doesn't support language elements.
Yeah.
But I think we can live without it. But if we change that Boolean, which is probably going to have much less usage by real humans, to a different name, if that was possible, for the Boolean property, then I thought the from end was kind of sweet. As a factory method.
I mean, maybe we can come up with a better name for the property currently called from end.
Is from
Yes,
end.
thank you. That's what I was thinking.
Is from end.
Actually, not bad.
That's perfect.
We should actually do that anyway.
I just find that to be I'm imagining it in some sort of complex code, and those two factory methods just look prettier. Or they're going to obviously appear inside parentheses, inside some other junk, and those constructors are going to just result in a lot of parentheses and a lot of nesting, of apparent nesting, visual nesting.
Oh,
I guess they both have as many parentheses, so cancel that argument, but I still like the factory methods.
Yeah.
The factory method specifically named from end.
Yeah, that does look good.
Okay.
And
What we call from end then?
is from end.
I guess that works.
Is backwards.
Is reverse.
If we've talked. Sorry, I'm late and last, and I only did half. But as long as we have like end and start, I would say is like don't. I would say is from end is more in line than is reverse.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
As long as we're going to have the start and end in this little set of stuff.
Then does the,
I'm happy with that. That's why I wanted to get a visualization of this. I think that's going to look pretty good in a
Do you want to add the
in
helper
language that
back
doesn't yet have language support,
Add the
or doesn't
helpers
ever
back.
have language support.
that you deleted from
So that's
from
equivalent.
start and from end don't exist right now.
Oh, good point.
But from start that's equal. But index, so from start, 1 is equal hat. Is equal. Oh no, it's not. From end is equal to hat 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I understand.
Well, from its hat value.
Yeah, but he had 2 and 1 there for a second ago, and I was right.
you want to put static in front of those?
No.
Right.
Fuck it. Doesn't matter. Clearly it's static, right?
And then the property from end, are we keeping it named from end rather than is from end to map to the property? I think it reads better as just from end here, but I wanted to make sure.
This-
Oh, you're saying the
I don't know if I
parameter?
do that.
The parameter.
No.
Oh, the
I
parameter.
Maybe
think
the parameter should also be is from end,
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay.
and a capital F.
I was gonna leave him all alone. Kathleen is being brutal.
Okay, I think
You're very demanding today, Kathleen.
Do you want to just grab the keyboard?
There's a mute button here somewhere. Let me find it.
I think this is good.
Yeah.
Can you colorize it, please?
I don't know why it doesn't colorize. I think there is a.
No, I'm just.
I think they have a bug in the regex. I think if I remove the semicolon there, I think it will work.
It's because you're using Sublime.
Using Sublime, yeah. I think VS Code is a bit more forgiving. I think this works. I think.
Yeah. When you use Sublime when you're talking to the VS Code people, you're gonna be pretty boss.
I do this all the time to piss people off. This is how you make friends very quickly in a meeting.
And so get offset for a not from end. So if you just had index 0 from the start and you pass that and then you said get offset with the length, it would still just return 0, right? Or would it return length in that case? Because it
return length.
So when you do what? When you
Are-
say
are we
Zero
getting-
dot get offset length would return length.
Length.
yes.
Okay. So you're saying get me the offset from length for the current value.
Get me the offset for a collection of length for the current value.
Yeah.
That's where length is a little confusing here. Like that, if it was collection length or something like that, then it would be more self-explanatory. I walk up to my specific index and I get its offset in this collection.
Yeah.
That is also.
Right.
Okay.
A collection of this length.
I don't want to bring this up, but
But you will.
Don't.
non-zero based arrays.
This is not for those.
We decided we don't care.
support them, right?
This is not for those.
So what happens when you have an array that is non-zero based and the compiler uses the syntax,
You
No,
can't. It's illegal.
You
but
can't.
what if the compiler doesn't know?
Don't care.
What do you mean no kind of doesn't know?
You know what
Z
happens?
arrays have different types, right?
You don't have a true. You know what happens when you give the compiler a true with the numeric value 2? We don't give a fuck.
Yeah. Well, you can have an array like a regular.
You can't have an S.
array.
You can't
You can have a
an SC
boolean
array with
that has a value
non-zero.
2.
In bracket
We
will
always know.
be zero size.
We always know
Zero.
whether or not the type is an SC array or a multidimensional array. Right now, this doesn't work on multidimensional arrays of any type.
Okay.
So it only works on SC arrays, which, as the name implies, is always zero-based.
So, I don't know,
So if
it's-
ML.NET comes back with requests for it working with multidimensional arrays,
The answer is we'll probably get there, but we have to.
What are you doing? That's the camera. You're just.
I'm pretty.
It's gonna
People
be-
should look at me.
This is gonna go viral. The state of the
I will find the section in the video. I will extract the GIF of that. I will make that happen. I'm sure you know was ginormous for a brief moment.
okay. What's YouTube say?
So the answer is we put in the doc comment, get the offset given a 0 index-based container of length and a reference.
We could also call the length and offset, right? And then it's the same thing. I don't know.
Yes, you're right. We could.
It's the same video. Not sure that makes it clear. Though.
Yeah,
Alright.
I wish we could. I would.
You want to call it collection length?
I would be willing to burn a longer name if we have one that we think is really good here, because it really collection
Yeah.
size,
Wait.
count, length.
Do consider span as a collection?
Well, it's not, but
No.
Is a collection indexable? Collection.
No,
a collection is not.
But collection has a count property, not a
Yeah.
length.
Yeah.
Anything that is indexable has a like according to interfaces has a count.
Okay.
And if you could go back in time, I would not make arrays length because it's a. So I think if we use the term collection, I think we want to use the name count because I don't think there's any collection that doesn't have count.
Yeah.
But then it also might be confusing for types like span, where this is also applicable, but we're saying it's not a collection.
It's not a collection, right? That's why I originally just had length.
Yeah.
Length is
Like, I think that's-
Yeah, you're right.
That's-
I know one collection, a mutable array.
Yeah, it's not really a collection. It's just that
Except
poor
that it
man's fix for the
implements-
runtime doesn't know about immutable arrays.
So,
All right.
are we done with index?
I think we're done with index. I
Okay,
think we
cool.
have pontificated this to death.
range.
No, wait.
No.
Challenge accepted.
Sorry, one more thing. You forgot to add the properties we said would exist. The static property for start and end or whatever they were called.
Start and last.
Yeah.
And maybe end as well.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So start and last. So my concern is somebody says start dot dot last, and they will be surprised by the output.
That's
Good.
kind of true.
Yeah. But if
Yeah.
we also had end,
Well,
or
same thing.
maybe length.
Well, end actually works in the sense that if end is hat 0,
Yes, then it would work.
Or maybe calling it length for hat 0.
No, it's different.
Yeah.
Length is different than end.
I mean, it's an index, right? An index can never be length. I mean, that's like you have a bug in your your mental model at that point.
What is our fault?
So that's so we had static index start, and then the other one was static index. What did we say? End.
either this is for or you're
And
not
then
typing.
possibly
No, I'm
static
typing-
index last.
I'm
Yeah,
typing.
I'm not saying you type. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, because I'm not a masochist. I type first and then I copy and paste it over because.
It's because of you,
Because
Kathleen.
people on the call are not nice today.
And I'm not helping proofread what Emo's typing.
I haven't figured out what index start actually does. If someone wants to explain that to me while Emo types.
I think that's it's just a shorthand for new index 0.
Do we want
It helps VB,
Yeah, it does. No, I like it. It's fine.
but not a lot because there's also a conversion.
Do we want it to
Yeah,
be?
the conversion is the one I'm seeing as useful there.
Wait, are we keeping the So, sorry I'm late. What happened? Did we keep the conversion?
Yes.
Yes.
The int conversion?
I'm really worried if
from
we kill the
India.
conversion on VB, so I'd like to keep the conversion.
Do we want it to be a
So-
property rather than a read-only field? Because if it's a read-only field, people can pass it as in.
Well, it will be aesthetic, I guess. I think, yeah, I don't have strong opinions. I think there was I don't know what the solution was, but I guess you could do it this way. Yeah,
Either way works. It's going to be read-only struct, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
if
guess
it's a
that's the
read-only
difference.
struct,
Yeah, it doesn't.
that's
It's a read-only struct, so it's probably more efficient. So just not to take a look a gift horse in the mouth, but with the implicit conversion, the people who are strongest against it aren't here. Are we going to be revisiting this again when they read the notes?
We revisited it.
No, the people who are strongest against it aren't in the room.
Well, I think even yesterday, I think we reached the conclusion that it doesn't really matter whether we believe it's the right thing or not because it has to happen at some point.
Okay, that's fine. I just didn't want us to.
It's just a question of like
Or
who
round
emits
three?
the code. Like, is
Yeah.
it in the framework? Like, it doesn't even change where the exception occurs. Right? It's still in the same spot. So, in practice, I don't think it matters.
Okay, sounds good. Just want to make sure that we want to come back another day.
So start is not very useful for VB, but end might be.
To me, start even in C#, I mean, I would say start and end are just. It's like similar to like 0. It's like it seems odd to have end but not start, right? It's just
Yeah.
normal symmetry.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with having them both. I'm just saying. Well, actually, for symmetry reasons, you might use start instead of 0 in VB as well. You might rely on that rather than the conversion when it's 0 you're getting.
It'll be a little more efficient, won't it, if you use the read-only struct? Won't it?
Possibly.
I don't think it is.
Once a JIT's been there, it probably won't matter.
It would
I
at least
agree.
be more
Yeah.
efficient if you're passing it by ref.
No, it's
Oh, yeah, it's
word
a
size.
single
It's
int,
actually
so-
going to be more expensive.
Right, because it's a single int.
Yeah.
Well, at least it will be less expensive after the JIT finishes the fixing the zero cost abstraction bug.
Still, it's not going to be more. It's not going to be more efficient. Registers don't get more efficient.
Range, on the other hand,
Range is separate. Yeah.
yeah, because that will only be passed in a single register on system V architectures.
Yeah, I should say no operators.
And are we just leaving the plus minus for V2
Plus minus on what?
index?
Yeah.
Yeah.
because you might want to be able to like move an index,
Well,
but there's no arithmetic operation to do it, and it's actually not trivial based on whether or not it's from the end or from the start.
okay, that's fine.
Like that's the reason to do it,
but that's a that's a core effects decision. That's not a language decision at that
right.
point.
This is a core effect.
But we try to group the things in here. Like, so one thing. Once again, sorry I'm late. If you guys talked about this, is there a reason we don't have a deconstruct method on range?
There's not. That's a good point. I had it in my head. I didn't ask about it.
But we haven't started range yet, so.
No, but even on index, would we do that?
On index, oh, that's a good point, because we could deconstruct that to a boolean in it.
Do we care?
It doesn't seem good.
For range, I think a deconstruct method makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let me just record the fact
probably.
that deconstruct on no deconstruct.
I wish you would let start and end in the opposite order. My OCD is firing something bad here.
It's alphabetical.
So what?
So all is
No.
It's not.
No, it's
Is that
alphabetical
some
with
acrylic
properties,
A?
methods, etc.
Okay.
That's what code cop or whatever recommends.
Yeah.
You can write me a ticket, but start first.
But as long as the deconstructor has to start first, then I'm happier.
It's both ends. Why do you care?
Do we allow overloading constructors? No, we don't. Never mind. We don't. Do we allow overloading deconstruct yet?
Priority, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Priority only. Well, you can overload it as much as you like, but we're not going to be able to bind it.
You
Is there a
just fail or you
bind?
pick random.
Okay.
So is there?
It's
Shouldn't
actually
we, for range, shouldn't we have a method?
So range you haven't started yet. So
like
let's
if you have
talk
a
about range.
deconstruct operation, you can't.
No, with deconstruct with range. Well, there's two things that are interesting with range. One is potentially deconstruct. I mean, if anything is a logical tuple. But the other one, I think, be interesting that's not up there is, I want to say the word bind, but essentially range is an abstract range. It has no concreteness. If you have like a from end value, should we have a bind method that returns a tuple?
If email would like to scroll down, there's
I do not.
close
So that's similar to the
method.
Close, but no,
So
close
once you
shouldn't
get
return
offset-
a range. Close should return a tuple.
What?
Because you're double exceptioning at that point. Because every time you do, because what you want when you close is you no longer have an index ever. Close is always giving you a tuple events.
Yeah, but then we have the problem of putting a tuple in a public API, and
You know
how that
what?
went last time.
You know what?
I think we have all the people we need to prove that decision right here. This is an API review. Let's just do it.
So let's take this one step at a time. So I think okay, we agree that we shouldn't return range. Is that fair?
Yeah,
Because that
because
seems like
otherwise-
it seems dumb
Yeah.
to do that.
Because the whole point is binding this down to ends.
Yeah. The only other suggestion that I forgot who it has was we would have one method that gives you start, end, and length as outs, and you just discard the portion you don't want.
We can do that. I think there's some level of one thing to consider is get someone more intelligent than me to talk about this.
So anybody would do? Okay, good.
Hey, we established the other day you're higher ranked than me. Like, you get to go to those Julia meetings. But the difference between a 3-word, passing something which is 3 words and 2 words can be significant.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And so I know parameter passing 2 and 3 words can be a big difference in performance. I believe returns are similar, but we should ask someone.
Returns are effectively equivalent to an out parameter of the struct.
Except that we don't have to do the right barriers.
So then the next question is 3 different methods.
Why would we have 3 different methods?
Get start, get end, get length. And you call them once you care.
Or I just say do a tuple.
And all of them you have to pass in the size of the collection.
Yeah, that's the downside. That's the thing I also don't like.
But why would you need length? Because length is already a parameter to close. So why would you return the input?
Well, one is the length of the collection, the other is the length of
The range, yeah.
of the range.
It's different, right?
So you can't hit me. You can't hit me. You're close. If Steven was here, he would perhaps.
Steven's on
He's
the
here.
call.
No,
Oh,
he's
Steve,
not
no,
on
he's
the
not.
call. He dropped out because
Oh.
when you walked in, he's like,
He's like, fuck this.
there's no point.
So we could have int range.
What, you put it what? In?
Int range.
A type?
Yeah.
Yes, we could.
Int 32
Next
range to be
suggestion.
named properly.
You mean like a type that's guaranteed to be closed? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So that's.
Well, isn't it guaranteed to be closed as long as end and start are both not from end?
No, because if you pass close a link, if you pass range.close returns int range.
No, but I was saying that a range could be considered closed as long as neither start nor end is from end, because then you can statically determine that they are correct with
Absolutely.
relevant to each other, etc. So it would still be valid to return range as long as we say neither the range returned here will have both
Yes,
parameters not.
but then it's static versus runtime checking, because do I have to reclose the range every time I use it? Like,
Well, I mean, you could.
I mean, like if like let's say you write the code, right? Like I think it just gets very ugly in
Okay,
code.
can you put something up here? Because I'm not even sure what we're talking about at this point.
So let's say you're in the. Can I do this? Can I say
We
view?
could have a is closed property, and the check would just be or start and ends internal values together and say is less than 0.
but then that just means you're adding more dynamic checking, because you have because you end up having essentially like a method which expects a closed range, both says if not is closed, throw argument out of range exception, then close, and then get in and get linked, which are also going to check once again, is it closed, is it closed? Like it's how much dynamic checking do you want?
It occurs to me that the API pattern today for people to do rangy things is to have an index or like an offset and a length, right?
So this is like four
And-
checks.
And it almost would be the most beautiful thing to return an offset and a length from this, right? Bring it back to the two int values that are the currency in the API today. Presumably, people who do this would often turn around and call something with that.
Right.
So, ideally, we'd return a tuple with those two things in it.
I mean, the other option is like you could have this, right? You could say var start, and that would be range get start end.
Or just range. Oh, the ints. Yeah.
Right, and then you could say something like that, right? You can just extract it in the way you want it to.
Yeah. I guess.
On line 18, Emo,
Sorry, what?
did you have the parameter named end on line 18?
Did I have what named in?
On line 18,
What?
is the parameter name correct?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
The parameter is the length of there are two lengths here, which is very confusing. The parameter is the length of the collection that we're
Yeah.
applying this to, and the length coming out is the length of the span.
You could call it range length to clarify.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. That confused me, but I think I'm a bit easily confused on this particular stuff.
You're probably not alone.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
not.
yeah, it worries me just a little bit. It's some of these words wind up repeated a bit.
I don't know. I feel like we've decided long ago that when you do this with ints, the preeminent values in question are the offset and the length, right? It's like, where do you start and how far do you go?
And most existing methods that have an int use those.
Exactly. So we already have patterns around that, and so it would feel consistent with that, as well as probably be useful in connection with that if we just settled on that. And then, yes, okay, I wanted the end, absolute end position. Well, add them.
Yeah.
That's like what you had to do before.
Right, true.
Essentially, I'm cashing out of the new abstractions, and
So you're saying that you don't care about the length version of that?
the end version of it.
Or the end version of that?
I'm saying that that's in a sense that's a decision that the design framework made long ago, like back in version 1 or whatever. That
Right.
we don't have overloads for start, comma length, and start, comma end, and all that. We just have start and length, and that's how you do this with ints. That's how you express these ranges with ints. And we've been very consistent throughout the framework about that. So we shouldn't have overloads either. Here is my argument. We should just have the one that corresponds to what we've always done. Unfortunately, that's the confusing one where there are two lengths involved. So I do get that.
Does start need to be an out parameter rather than just returned?
Well, he has two versions of it.
No. So I was saying you could have the second one that doesn't return a tuple, but it returns int and only has out var length. So it returns start and then has length returned as the out var, which I think is more common for when you return two values. Return one directly and then have the other be the out, rather than have both be out.
But which have equal importance, so I don't know how we pick.
Start generally comes first, so return start.
Yeah, I think it seems worse than both to me. Yeah, I have to say. I mean, there's yeah.
Why do we want the out version? Is there a scenario that's going to work better?
We cannot agree on how we name tuples.
It's going to postpone the terrible discussion.
No, we should
I'm
just.
sorry. I
do
understand. Never mind. Okay, we'll just stop now. No terrible discussions.
No, we could have the terrible discussion.
Yeah, let's do it. We're gonna be
honestly,
we're forced to do it anyway. Let's do it.
I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just telling Kathleen what's the hesitation here.
Yes.
Well, you'll blame me for the terrible discussion.
No, no, we should just have the discussion.
Yeah, and the former is nicer for deconstruction because you could presumably pass into a method that takes start offset, call the tuple version, and have the compiler deconstruct the redirect call, right?
We don't.
Sorry, that's.
We don't splat tuples.
Oh, you
into
don't
arguments.
splat it for arguments right now. That's F sharp.
That's
I
F sharp.
think so.
Okay.
We could one day. It's been proposed, but
Yeah, we've had a couple proposals around it. It's not terrible.
Basically, I just think the tuple version looks better because I don't like the void return of get offset length.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, personally,
I don't think we should return one int,
I think this
and
is.
the void return is just nasty.
I'm just wondering the code in which it's a preferable way to do it because the tuple, we always have tuples available when we have this feature. So I did like the name range length. I'm just saying, you just changed that name. I thought it was a little bit helpful to have them have different names.
Well, I'm just trying to make the code samples comparable so that we don't compare apples to oranges. They have the same. They basically use the same variable name so that the couple one actually looks shorter because it actually is shorter.
But I mean, can anybody describe code where the out variable one actually looks better?
No.
I can see code where they're equivalent and code where the first is better. But
Yeah.
the tuples are bad.
essentially, I think the only place where out variables are still better is in try patterns, where getting just a bool back lets you put the call directly in a conditional context, and getting additional values out through out parameters is
I
nicer.
completely agree.
But this is not that.
And
This is not that, yeah.
the JIT might optimize the out parameter better because it currently does that when inlining today.
I kind of suspect that due to the lack of a necessary right barrier, the tuple version will eventually turn out better.
Well, the
Which
right
one
barrier
is
gets
that?
elided a lot of times when you're inlining and then the variable's dead. Whereas it doesn't get elided as often for structs today, which a tuple is.
It's a point in time.
Yeah,
thing.
it's a point in time
It-
thing.
As you know, if we start putting tuples in the framework, they will get more use, and then
Yeah.
JIT will optimize more.
Yeah. and
Nobody
current-
is actually going to bat for the offsets, except for some pretty minor things. Does anybody feel strongly that the out, does anybody feel strongly that we do need that out overload?
No.
No,
all the people not in this room.
I think the only concern is the discussion of, for the public signature, is it going to be upper or lowercase for the start and range length parameters that are returned? Because that was the issue last time.
So out of curiosity, if get offset length would return a key value pair, it would be equivalent syntax-wise on the consumption side, right? You deconstruct key value, the key value pair and
does not
tuples.
have a deconstruct method on it.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't
Probably
think we
any
ever
there.
added one.
As far as I know, it does not.
Did we talked about adding?
Yeah, I was about to say that.
I don't think we did.
Let's say.
I think
what
we
is-
did we add mass extension methods maybe?
I don't think so,
Oh.
but I know we did, right? In our own code, we added it, but I'm not sure that
Okay.
we ever added it directly.
Oh, there is one on key value pair
Oh,
now,
thank God.
and one on dictionary entry.
But
Yeah, I think we did it.
come on, this is not a key and a value though. I mean,
No, I'm just saying. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's a tuple type or not, right? All it matters is that you have a deconstruct method, and then that call set would work exactly the same way, right? So
Yeah.
if we really,
Then we might as well just say value tuple.
yes.
But-
Except
It doesn't matter. There's going to be a debate no matter what.
Yeah.
We went through this before. It doesn't matter what type you return. There will be a debate.
well, if we make it destructive, just set the public,
There was debate about that too.
about what part?
About if you make your own struct with a deconstruct, there will be a debate about whether or not it should have accessors for the individual elements, and then those accessors, it will be a debate on the names.
okay.
There is no winning this. I promise you. The only way to win it is to actually have the discussion and just settle on
So I mean,
something.
like, all I'm saying is that, like, I think nobody likes the second one, right?
Yeah.
Clearly.
Like what?
So the other question
I'm
is like, if
questioning
we-
about like why you need to return both. I mean the start and length.
because you need to
one
close both of them.
Yeah, because
No, I mean, why you have to?
because more often than not, you're going to have
Oh.
a method that takes a range, and then you're going to want to call the overload that takes a start and an offset.
Because you have to do this, right? You have to say return substring start comma length, right? That's the actual thing that does the work.
So it will be two folds: range dot start, range dot length.
Yeah, that's just a little unfortunate. They both have to take the same argument.
Yeah. Why not?
So so basically, to be clear, you're proposing this, right? You're basically saying instead of doing this, you would say
Get length.
Bar
and
start.
Get start.
equals get start. Jesus Christ, if only I could. Well, that reads a little bit retarded, but I guess that's just the way it is.
I think there's less work overall if you have them combined in a single method.
Most of the time, people will have a start in positive value, so the index they will have the index. They don't have to call it again.
Is that what?
They don't have to call start all the time if they know that the start is always from start index.
How would substring know that?
Yeah, substring has to check because someone could pass a range in that's
And
at 3 having
this is
at
just
2.
strictly more typing, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
and more
just longer.
and more computation work because get length has to compute the start once more, and
It's more work for the JIT and the user in all cases.
yeah. But it is. I agree. It's simpler.
I mean, I would say like I would prefer this one over this one for sure.
Okay.
So I would say like let's delete this one as a like generally ugly thing, and then I think it really boils down to these two. And what I don't like about the second one is the fact that now this is really confusing, right? Get length, and then you're passing in the length. It's like, wow, what's wrong with you? But like I don't know how else you would do that.
Yeah, that is annoying.
Unless we don't give you a length, we just say you have to do the computation yourself. But I don't like that either.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole +1 -1 disaster that is about to happen for everybody now.
Mm.
Yeah, I prefer the top one,
Which one is the top one?
the tuple,
Tuple-based one.
I prefer tuple.
and that will work nice in languages that do argument splatting.
It would work nice. Well, and also if we ever do it, but if we ever did argument splatting, I think we would probably logically end up allowing the struct methods to participate in splatting. Otherwise, you have to declare intermediate tuple just to do splatting.
Or you would support anything that has a deconstruct method.
Yeah,
what would you
probably.
say?
Yeah.
Because that's the logical out. So if we did a type or tuple, it would both work.
Sure, but
So-
not out variables.
Want to talk about names?
Well, out variables work in F# because they automatically convert that into a tuple.
Only if you have one out variable.
So
No,
let's.
they also do it for a couple, I think.
So before we go into
I
the topic
think I checked the
discussion,
code and it only
Don is in
makes
town
sense.
today. You can go ask him in person.
I think it's special.
Could also just check
Yeah.
on Sharp Lab.
Yeah, he just yelled at me about the default interface methods for a while.
Oh. Well, there you go.
I
He
took
did
that
that
bullet for
language
you.
design too, so
Huh?
I'm not sure why he's wasting more time.
So I'll
He
explain to
can,
him.
he can consolidate it all
It's a
into
way to battle jet lag.
yeah.
So,
so I think we agreed we want the get offset length method.
well, yeah, we could discuss the name of that as well, whether there's something more conceptual.
Well, I would just say it probably should start with offset because on index we call it offset. It kind of makes sense to call it offset here, not start. But I don't feel super strongly about that.
We could
It
also
just
call it
feels-
apply. And we talked about close, there's
Close
there's
bind,
various
apply, yeah.
verbs we could consider, even though it doesn't mutate, we could still consider having verbs that are more concise.
So the consistency, yeah, I think the Tarek brought this thing up. Like I think originally we had like close or something, right? But it doesn't. Like within the BCI, close means something very different. It seems like just
Yeah.
odd. Like, I mean, it makes sense if you think of it as an open interval or something, but it doesn't really make sense for. Like the thing you want to get out is the offset and the length, right? So generally, like calling the method what it does may make more sense than trying to introduce a term that will not be used that broadly.
And do we? Is that what we call them elsewhere? Do we call them those two ints? We call them offset and length.
We don't really like, but even in the framework, I think at some point we looked it up. I think the most commonly used names are index and start,
Wait, what?
but both of them are not great names here.
Oh, you mean start for the first element?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it index because that would be really weird.
Get start as long as you use
Because we have an
and.
index type now.
Get start and length is a reasonable.
Yeah.
I mean,
But we always use length.
The only thing where I don't like start is because you have a start property and that returns an index.
yeah, I'm not. As it's the same value represented as an int and an index, so they aren't actually different. They're just.
Right, but logically,
Different
what this method does, it
representations.
calls index.getOffset. Right?
I know.
I know. I just like the idea that we reuse the term there, but like I don't. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not feeling super strong.
wrong.
I'm more concerned about length being
Yeah.
both an input and an output.
Yes.
This is so we kind of avoided having a longer, more descriptive name
Yeah.
when we talked about index.getOffset. But now we have the same parameter again in a context where we also want to return a length.
Yes.
Well, we can call it count.
So one's count and one's length, and yeah, it's totally clear which is which.
It's never clear, especially if you're using a mutable array. You just type the wrong one every time and then you correct it. It is what it is.
Call it size instead.
Spam.
one more time, like one more term that you can screw up.
So the one thing that I'd really like to settle before we have to go is that last thing where we add a
Tuple
helper.
naming?
No, let's reserve this for a different meeting. I think because also the people that were offended by some of this are not here either. I would rather say like we can settle on what this thing returns differently. Like first agree on the name and like what the shape is, right? I think that seems more. Like, is there anything else but this method now on range that we still need to discuss?
Yeah, the helper that
The
I
helper
really,
for
really
what?
need. Need a helper in the compiler to generate a new array from an array range indexer.
Oh, that was the runtime helper thingy?
Yeah.
I thought we approved that, didn't we?
I think we need to just talk with
I just don't think we have a. I need a signature and a location.
Yeah, we just
I
need,
just
to, know
need a
what to,
signature.
we just need to know what to look for.
I just need a fully qualified signature.
Let me quickly go. I think this was. No, I think you're right. I think I put it into the designs repo, but it never been anywhere else. Where is this? System range. Yeah, searching for compiler is not really helpful.
I controlled and I caught myself.
Okay. I can never tell whether you're trolling or not.
I was going to say, should we make range n?
And so that basically slices range out of the array.
No, it allocates a new array
And copies.
and copies.
Okay.
Which is the decision that was made. Wait, do we need one for string 2, or are we just...
That should be added directly onto string.
Gotcha.
The implementate, like everything there is just the string type, and so they should handle that.
Gotcha.
But all this is compiler work, so.
Sounds great.
So yeah, the open issues we have, find the list of types, we'll have indexes. Okay, we didn't talk about that because we barely had enough time to talk about the types. Index type is of the constructor, environment structure methods. I think we have them consistent now.
So we'll have a constructor in range, right?
We don't currently. Should we have one?
Yeah, I think we settled on moving to a constructor for range, a public 2-argument constructor for range instead of the create method.
Oh yes, there was a create method that we knew. That's right.
So we don't have to keep create method, right?
Right, we drop the create and we have a 2-argument. And the compiler is going to drop well-known. It's going to drop all the well-known members except for the constructor. Yeah. And value in front end in the index.
And the constructor takes two indexes, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. And then we will probably still have the factory methods, I guess, for people that don't have language support, right? So they can not really,
convenience, but not
Yeah.
for compilers.
we'll keep the-
Why'd you have factory methods if you have a constructor?
Because it's cleaner if you're in VB.
Range that create versus new range, no difference there if they take the same arguments.
No, it's not the create. It's there are other factory methods that take only 1 or 0 arguments.
Oh, that's fine. Yes.
Yeah.
And those are convenience factories that are useful in VB, for instance.
And range.all can be a static read-only field.
What do we have? All from start, and what was the other one?
To end.
To end, that's right, yeah.
Should they just be called
Just to
from and
confirm,
to?
because some of this gets my my head a little bit confused. From start means fundamentally, logically the same thing on index and range. They're not opposite, are they?
Nope, they're the same.
All right, good.
In a sense, right? I mean, one gives you a range, the other one gives you an index, but yes.
Well, I mean, logically what they're doing.
Yeah, they point to the same start, yes. So what was you think, Matthew, or to say something?
Should they just be called from and to instead of from start and to end?
I would to end. I think I'd feel strong about the to end.
I dislike from and to simply because that sounds like conversions.
Yeah, and if we ever wanted to add other overloads in the future,
Yeah, you're right.
then
You're right. Okay.
And
What
then we
about
said
start
all
at?
should be a field or property, right?
What about start at and end at?
That's
I'm not
good.
crazy about from. I can live with it, but from and to do seem a bit odd here.
So what was the suggestion? Instead of from, you would do what?
Start at and end at.
Oh, I can live with that.
It's more consistent.
It's not something that that I get really loud about, but it is something I prefer.
It seems reasonable.
That's good.
Okay.
Do you have this type? Are you typing somewhere where you're just
Yeah.
hiding it from me because you think I'm mean?
No,
No,
nobody
it's not
else
that.
can
It's
see.
because I have duplicated displays and it's very hard to type and you have to turn your head every single time.
Oh, I understand. Sorry about that.
No
I
worries.
don't mean to harass you, remember? Well, yeah, I probably do mean to harass
I
you.
was about to say you're lying, but that's okay.
Hey, it's late here and I'm hungry, so I get to be a little grumpy.
So where are you right now?
I'm in Tennessee, waiting to go spend time with my mom. As soon as I finish with you guys, I go spend some time with my mom at the hospital.
Where in Tennessee?
Crossville? Do you know where that is?
Where?
Outside Crossville, it's Pleasant Hill, but it's halfway between Nashville and Knoxville. If you want a general idea.
Yeah, I grew up in Nashville, so I know roughly where Pleasant Hill is.
Yeah, it's out. Yeah, it's out past Sparta and Cookville, and before you get to Crossville.
Well, so I'm gonna say there's a bunch of people from Tennessee now that are here, and I'm the only one that's not an Alabama fan.
Well, yeah, yeah.
The real
Yeah.
question is Eastern or Western Tennessee.
Central Nashville.
This is like right in the middle.
It's like dead center.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
time zone changes halfway through, so I still divide people. It's a very clean divide.
Oh, I'm in Central.
I'm
I grew up
about
in
30
Central.
miles from the time zone split. Maybe not that far. But I am in Central Time.
So I think all the open issues we address except for the very first one.
Which one? Oh, okay.
But we can't finalize that without more people being able to yell, right?
Well, like I think first we need to talk about index and range themselves before we talk about what APIs take it, right? I think that seems like a
Yeah.
sensible thing.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I misread your point.
I mean, do we want to just, if we don't want to finalize, do we want to just start with a final initial list?
So I think we already had that, and I think you already have a PR for that in there, right? Like somewhere.
No, you have it in the spec. You have the list.
Yeah, I have it in the spec. I don't think we have an issue for that.
Yeah, the spec.
Like it's basically.
And you go all the way down. All the way down.
Come on, people.
It would actually be good if I could go ahead and take off. So unless you guys are going to make any decisions, I mean, if we're down to looking at APIs, I think I may take off if that's okay.
Absolutely.
You miss me?
Let's say yes, but you know what the real
We'll
answer
miss
is.
you, but we'll survive.
All right. Well, I'm going to say goodbye, and I think we got some stuff done, and so hopefully it's moving this thing to the finish line. Okay.
Sounds great.
Bye-bye.
Sounds good.
I'll send those later. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's good. Yeah, I think there was still some concerns. Like Stephen brought this up a few times. I think on the PR for this thing that what we said in the LDM already, right? That there's this concern that we may make it easy to use the span-based APIs and allocate. Sorry, that we make it easy for people to allocate by accident without knowing that. So basically, I think the key argument from them was if you say span of bytes, and then on the right hand side you happen to have an array, and you say indexer with a range. You're creating an array that you then cast down to a span of t, but the source code looks clean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that my counter argument for this is that pretty much .NET makes it already very easy to allocate. That I don't feel obligated to making it harder. In the sense that if you really write performance-oriented code, you cannot rely on the language to block you from allocating. Like you have to do some measurements. Like you can box at any given point in time. Like This is not the thing that breaks you, in my opinion.
And the case that they're talking about is very analyzer friendly spot.
Yes, I would agree with that too.
Like if you take an array and you pass in a range and you assign it to, and it's targeting a span, like that's a analyzer's like wet dream. Like this is like what analyzers do. It's like no,
you can just ban it too. Like don't use the array range indexer in CoreFX code. Seems easy enough.
Right. Well, I mean that's one way to do it. Like an analyzer, either way. Like it's a very straightforward thing to say that in hyperf code we do this, not this.
Right.
I think the challenge today is that I think part of my team was involved with FXCop and they have heard the line we can fix it in FXCop too many times, right? So I think the problem is we don't have a productized analyzer set for CoreFX, so everybody believes that this is a pie in the sky thing rather than a reality. So I think that's where most of these things are not necessarily convincing.
We have one for Roslyn, so the question is invest in.
I'd say that's
that's a fair statement. All I'm saying is that
all it is, frankly, in CoreFX part is just lack of investment. Andy said we have very specific patterns that we ban.
Yep.
Roslyn, we have a set of analyzers that are excellent at enforcing them. Like we require configure rate everywhere to our demise. And
I think the concern for the people on my team is not that their code is shitty, it's just that the narrative of like, oh, we have to write analyzer for ourselves and so will our customers in order to not write shitty code, that's the thing that causes the smell. But I think that what I told people on my team is that
CoreFX is not representative of the world's
That's basically what I tell people is like the thing is right now the last 2 years we have hired people on the team that have only ever seen performance tuning. Right? That's the only thing in their career that they've done here, right? So they're very biased for, oh, this is the number one thing we work on. But in reality, is that no, we had 10 years before, 15 years before, we did other things, and like, but the customer segment is still spanning the whole thing. And so I think that's something that just is sometimes harder to sell. But I
we
think
never
that's
would
just
have
what
done dynamic if we were highly focused on.
Look, that's a bad one to take.
I was about to say because
let's pick
would,
a
right?
link. Let's pick a feature that we might use on a daily basis.
I think that a lot of people use dynamic. Based on bug reports, a lot of people use dynamic on a daily basis.
I just got an email today because the VS team is upset that I use dynamic in Roslyn. Because I use dynamic as a cheap way of reflecting into the VS private APIs.
Nice.
You should feel bad.
I do not at all.
Yeah.
All right.
Forward that one to Dave Keen with all the other private reflections.
It's actually public reflection. It's
that's fine.
Do an assembly load, casting things to dynamic, call some methods.
Okay, so all this seems fine.
All right, so then I think we are pretty much done with the issues.
Memory doesn't have an indexer?
Memory does not have one because the idea with memory is you have to get the span before you do anything with that. The only thing we give you is the ability to get a smaller memory.
So you can slice, but you can't index.
Correct. Because the idea is once you index, you should get a span out of it first because it's more efficient.
Even as a shorthand, we don't let you do that.
No, because once you do that, you write code like for blah in I in.
Can
you
you scroll down?
You want to make people only do it once.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, fair enough.
Can you scroll down just a little bit on that one?
But
cursor again?
shouldn't it still have a